All right, everyone. All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight for this No to the Recall, Yes to Progress Town Hall. I'm Irene Gao, the Executive Director of Courage California. We're an organization fighting for a more progressive California with over 1.5 million members around the state and nation. So before we get started, I'd like to do an Indigenous land acknowledgement. Courage California acknowledges our presence on the traditional and unceded territory of hundreds of First Nations who are the traditional caretakers of this land we call California. As visitors on this land, we pay our respects to the ancestors, elders, relatives, and future generations. So I'd like to thank this evening's co-hosts, Alliance of Californians for Community Empowerment Action, Black Women for Wellness Action Project, California Donor Table, California League of Conservation Voters, CHISPA, Consumer Attorneys of California, NARAL Pro-Choice California, Voices for Progress, and Women Against Recall. And you'll be hearing from several representatives from those co-hosts tonight. ASL interpretation for tonight is provided by Selena Flowers and Susan Pacheco Correa of Pro Bono ASL. So tonight is about the recall, but it's really about all of us. The recall election is part of our battle for the soul of the state, and the one that we've been fighting for as long as we've been a state. This recall is a choice about who we want to be as a state, and it's important for us to demonstrate the power of our diverse and progressive majority here in California. We have to move forward with courage, compassion, and great urgency to address climate change, protect our workers and families, and dismantle white supremacy. Courage California joined this fight against the recall in March to protect a governor who has delivered on some key wins for our state and to call all Californians into this campaign to defeat the recall and keep us on a pathway to progress. I want our state to be defined by how we take care of each other and continue to lead the nation on policies for clean air and water, single-payer healthcare, secure and quality jobs, fair and just taxation, and reparations and repatriation of land to Native communities. We did not elect President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris in 2020 to then turn around and elect a Trump ally into the governor's office in 2021, not on our watch. That's why we're saying no to the recall, yes to progress. So we've got a packed program for you tonight. We want to give you the information and tools that you need to vote no on the recall and mobilize other voters to do the same. As you all know, you've likely seen a lot of the polls and the media, that this election is going to come down to turnout. And turnout depends on energy and engagement. We can all do more to reclaim this recall battle and build progressive momentum to head into the critical 2022 midterms and big policy fights. So tonight we'll share some of the results of a statewide youth poll that Courage California conducted in the past month in partnership with Data for Social Good, Communities for a New California, and Inland Empire United. We'll hear from a panel of community partners in San Diego Supervisor Nora Vargas and Assemblymember Alex Lee on what's at stake and what we can do on the recall. Then we'll do a quick Q&A before I turn it over to some of our partners and the Newsom Stop the Republican Recall campaign to offer get out the vote volunteer opportunities. So before we get into the program, a couple of housekeeping notes. As you'll see, we already have a few questions come in, but please submit questions at any time using the Q&A function that you'll see at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So we may answer some questions in the chat as we go if they're pretty straightforward. And of course, we may not be able to get to all of your questions tonight. Another big thing to note, of course, this is a really hot topic, one where people have very strong emotions on all sides. So we welcome comments, but I do want to be clear that we won't tolerate any inappropriate or disparaging language in the chat or in the Q&A forum. So we will remove anyone who violates this policy. So let's get into it. Again, like you're going to hear from a lot of folks, a lot of information and a lot of motivation. And so I want to turn it over to our first guest tonight. I'd like to introduce Jose Luis Bedoya and Lisa Garcia Bedoya of Data for Social Good. They're going to be the ones to share the results of our statewide youth poll to kick us off. Jose and Lisa?
Thank you so much, Irene, and thanks to everyone for having us today and for being here. I'm going to give you a few sort of a framing for the poll while Jose Luis puts the slides up. So this is a poll that was in the field from July 19th to August 1st. It was online only. It was sent to registered voters aged 18 to 29 that have emails as part of the voter file with oversamples of Black, Latino, and AAPI voters in California. We had 2,345 respondents to the poll, and the results have been weighted to reflect all California registered voters aged 18 to 29. I do think as a framing for understanding people's answers to the poll is to just remember what this generation has been through. So the oldest of these voters were age 16 in 2008 when the financial system collapsed and the Great Recession began. Since then, they've had the movement for Black Lives, results of climate change, the Trump administration, wildfires here in California, a global pandemic, uprising regarding racial reckoning, and more wildfires. And so I think that the answers to this poll really reflect just the tumult that has been a big part of the lives of these young voters. And I think they reflect a general distrust of the political system and who's in office. We don't find a lot of excitement about Newsom, but we don't find a lot of excitement in terms of getting rid of Newsom either. And there are a lot of undecideds you will see. And so I think the takeaway from this is that these are folks that are really hungry for a new kind of politics, and that there is tremendous opportunity to create a new narrative about what the progressive vision of the future for California could be. And with that, I will turn it over to Jose Luis Bedoya.
Excellent, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay, perfect. Thank you. So let's get into it. A couple of questions that we want to start with, which is the poll characteristics. Who are they? Who answer the questions? And how do they reflect the state of California? So what we have in front of us is basically the youth universe. This gives you a sense of, who we actually had to choose from in order to fill our poll. Here you can see that 18 to 29-year-olds are about 4.2 million registered voters. Affiliation is mostly Democratic, with about 2 million. NPP is 1.2. Republicans are about 613, and other is 9%, as you can see. If all things go well, 48% would be close to a win for the Democrats. But again, we need some folks from the NPP side as well as other to come in. Gender is about 50% to 47. Other is 3%. Marital status, most people at this age are single, not married. You can see on table 1 is the voter frequency for this universe, as well as the table 2, which is the race category. Okay, so how did we do with respect to our poll, and how does it reflect California? So the overall universe is the numbers that I just mentioned on the slide previous. The column that says poll is how we came out in terms of numbers. So Latino, we came out 30%, a little bit under. White, we're right on. Asian, we're overrepresented. African American, we're overrepresented. Other, we're right on the mark. And in terms of female to male, females answer the poll more than males, as well as non-gender or non-binary gender. From a participation perspective or partisanship perspective, here's how the poll broke out on the chart on the right. So as you can see, slightly more Democratic. Republicans right on, NPP a little bit under, and other a little bit under. So overall, we came pretty close to the representation, and where we didn't, we then adjusted on our side. Okay, so we asked the question, how do you think of yourselves? So again, we have the labels of Democrat, Republican, NPP, all these kind of different labels, but we also wanted to see how people self-identified. So in this case, somewhat liberal and very liberal were 44%. Those are the two biggest categories. And then one interesting category, which is kind of a continuation of the NPP category, is I don't think of myself in these terms. So just some information for us to think about as we go through the poll. Now, one of the key things that we wanted to ask people is, what is your key issue? And so for youth, at least at this point, the environment. The environment is number one, far and beyond everything else. Jobs in the economy, housing, et cetera, are far second, as you can see. Now, we did try to get a little bit of a sense, dig a little bit under and see if there's other issues with respect to the environment. So if the answer to the environment, it's basically that people are concerned about climate change. So that's the number one issue. That's the reason why the environment. So it's not, as we've recently heard the UN reports where, we're close to a very red mark or a dangerous mark. Rightfully, youth are concerned about where they're going to end up in terms of the future that we're going to leave them and the environment we're going to leave them. Okay, how will the youth engage? So let's talk about how they're interested. So 43% answer the question, and how interested are you in this recall, this year's recall election of Governor Newsom? So 43% were either extremely or somewhat interested, and only 23% said somewhat uninterested or extremely uninterested. Now, again, 22%, that middle category is going to swing things, and this is a message you're going to see a lot in the poll. That's the folks that we're trying to convince. Now, honestly, 11% said, I didn't know there was a recall, which I thank people for saying that, because it gives them a sense of, gives you a sense of where people's minds are. Now, we asked them, do you plan on voting if it were held, if that's scheduled, then 59% of people said that they were interested in voting in the recall. So that's a good mark in terms of, trying to make sure that there's some interest there. So that's the good news. The bad news is that we still have 30% that are not interested. Now, I see that as an opportunity to then bring about some additional folks in there to make sure that you have the numbers necessary to vote no. Now, we wanted to show you a little bit of an interest by race. So here you can see that it varies tremendously. So you have interest in terms of all the Asian categories. We had a number of Asian categories. We put them together for this summary. 51% said, yes, they're interested. White 63, Black 48, Latinx 57, and other 62. So there's a good amount of interest, a little low perhaps in the Black category, but I see that as an opportunity because 36% are still not yet decided. Again, some of the good news and some of the challenges that we have to face. 43% said that no, they would not recall the governor, so that's good. But 32% still don't know. So that's one of the categories that I think that organizations like yourselves have an opportunity to bring about the change and push that over 50%. So again, going back to the initial interest, so do you plan on voting in the recall election that's scheduled to be held on September 14th? So we wanted to know if they were planning to vote, which way would they vote? So what we saw is that of that 59%, 36% said yes to the recall, 45% said no, and 19% said I don't know. So the good news is that no to the recall is leading, but perhaps not at the wide enough majority, or perhaps not at the 50% majority that we would like to avoid some of these secondary, tertiary notions of who should lead our state. So the I don't know yet represents an opportunity for us to go out there and make, convince folks to come back to our side. So we wanted to also ask in terms of, who, if the recall were held today, who would you vote for would you vote to recall Governor Newsom and remove him from office? We wanted to ask the same question by race, but it seems like, at least from the information that we have at this point from the poll, the Latinx folks would be most interested in voting no, or I don't know yet, but they seem to be the most interested in supporting the governor at this point. Now, one of the questions that we wanted to ask people is, where do you get your information? And who do you trust? What's your most trusted place? And so we asked a number of questions, a number of categories, anywhere from online research to streaming sources to church, mosque, et cetera, et cetera. What we found is that this generation seems to be a little bit more of self-supporting. They want to do things on their own. They want to do their own research. So online research was the first category, number one. The second of that was print, radio, and TV podcasts. So they have a sense of wanting to get the information on their own and then verifying that through maybe some additional means of more reputable source. And then what we asked them is, which platforms do you use? What platforms do you use, and check daily specifically. So YouTube, Instagram were by far the number one categories. They're kind of the first category of things. Second category is Facebook to Reddit, as you see. And then you have a tertiary category, which is more of a utilitarian, tool, Twitch, WhatsApp, etc. Or in some cases, none of the above. So I think that's it for us, and we wanted to leave a little bit of room. I know that Lisa's for Q&A. Lisa's answering some of those questions online. If you have further questions, please let us know.
You can put them in the chat or use the Q&A function.
I do want to give a little bit more context too. So Courage has been partnering with Communities for a New California, Data for Social Good, and Inland Empire United on this poll. So it's meant to be an ongoing poll so that we really understand youth voters better and also start to identify trends. It just so wonderfully happened to be a good coincidence that the first poll that we put out in the field was right before the recall. And so we took advantage of that to understand how youth were feeling about the recall. And of course, again, there's a lot of polls out there, but this is the only poll that we've seen so far that has really been dedicated to youth and has spoken about the recall. So if you have any further questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. Jose Luis and Lisa will be with us for a little bit, and also feel free to put them in the Q&A as well. So thank you, Jose Luis and Lisa. I know I especially appreciate it. I know you guys are on vacation. So thank you so much for working on this poll with us. I appreciate your partnership, and very lovely to have you guys on this call. Not from your usual workstations as well. So thank you so much. If folks want to learn more about this, Courage we will be putting out a memo and a press release about some of these polling results and some of the analysis. And as I mentioned, that some of them speak directly to the recall, and some are also just about sort of broader concerns and sort of trends and behaviors of youth registered voters around the state as well. So, and now I'd like to introduce, we have a panel of community partners who are going to provide more on the ground insights and give a fuller picture of how and why we need to engage our diverse communities on the recall on the issues that matter most to all of us. So joining us tonight are Amy Allison. She's the founder and president of She the People, and she'll be speaking with us on behalf of Women Against the Recall. We have Matt Abular-Macias from California League of Conservation Voters, Jairo Cortez from Chispa in the Orange County, and Vanya Quarles from Inland Empire United. So thank you all for speaking with us tonight. So Matt, I want to start with you. So you saw in our youth poll that the #1 issue on their minds, and I think it's fair to guess that most people's minds, is the environment, especially with the report that just came out. And this is, we also know that this is consistent with what we know of our Courage members and Californians in general. So what are some of the environmental wins that we've had with Governor Gavin Newsom, and how did those wins come about with the partnership of groups like CLCV?
Yeah, again, so much for inviting us to be a part of this, Irene, on Courage California. Matt Abular-Macias with the California League of Conservation Voters, pronouns he, him. And to answer the question, I'm actually going to probably start in a place that people don't expect. I mean, it's clear any alternative to Governor Gavin Newsom is going to be terrible for the environment. That, I don't have to probably do a lot of explaining on why that is to you all. Y'all are a smart bunch of people, people who are very engaged in what's happening. But I do want to point out some things that can help people really understand, what the role of the governor would really be, and how that could change should the recall pass. And I would start by also saying that as a progressive and on the environment and on climate change, of course, there's so much we want Governor Newsom to go farther. But again, the alternative would be so much worse. So the first thing I'm actually going to start with is actually the appointments that the governor makes, and the hirings that they do for essential agencies that touch on the environment. A lot of people forget, but the governor has appointments to the air quality management districts or air boards across the state. One such appointment that he made in office so far for the South Coast District allowed us to get a huge victory of an indirect source rule on warehousing that organizers in the South Coast Basin have been fighting for a long time. That wouldn't have been possible and would not be possible if anybody else was the governor, right? And there's also appointments to CARB, the Air Resources Board, the Public Utilities, and CalGEM, DTSC, EPA, the Natural Resource Agency. Those are all critical to the environment and protecting our environment, conserving our resources, and fighting the climate crisis that we're in, which if you also the IPCC report, we're in code red. So we need to make sure that we're not taking any steps backwards on this. So that's one thing that the governor does that would be a big loss for progress on the environment. The second thing, and this actually touches on federal thing, he appointed US Senator Alex Padilla. Alex Padilla is a champion on climate. He went into DC guns blazing and has been the most vocal US Senator California has had for environmental protection and addressing the climate crisis, period. That's a huge win for the climate movement and also for Californians. And again, not to like scare people, but should he not get through the recall and something were happen to Senator Padilla or Senator Feinstein, and that governor needs to make an appointment at that point. If it's not Governor Newsom and it's one of the alternatives, there goes our majority in the US Senate for progressive policy and federally. Then to get to more specific environmental policies that Governor Newsom has ordered and or supported, start with just some of the executive orders, right? So he signed an executive order that would prohibit the sale of new passenger vehicles, buses, and trucks that use gasoline by 2035 and 2045. He also ordered the end to new fracking permits by 2024, phase out of fossil fuel extraction by 2045, signed an executive order to protect 30% of California's lands and waters by 2030. Those are huge. Those are really big deals. Of course, we need those to be sooner. We want those to be sooner, but Governor Newsom's the governor who actually put this into, okay, the state's gonna move forward and do this, right? Then other big priorities on the policy that he signed as governor, and actually one that he really championed and was a big campaign priority for him and he delivered on, was a safe and affordable drinking water. We know over 1 million Californians don't have access to safe, affordable drinking water in their homes and schools. And Governor Newsom championed this and made sure that we're changing that. And I'll leave it at that just in interest of time, because I know I went a little long, but there's a couple other things that we could get to later on if there's time. But just to say, to wrap up, Governor Newsom has been great on the environment and it's really an ally to the climate movement. Of course, we need to continue to push forward because there's a lot that needs to be done, but that only gets done if we make sure that the recall fails.
Thank you, Matt. I appreciate you talking about both the policies and sort of the things that are like more in the weeds or behind the scenes. I think right when Biden and Harris were elected, it seemed like every single announcement about an appointment or a nomination was like big news. And it was something that people really discussed, but that is something that even me, I would say, as somebody who's very politically engaged, I'm not paying attention to that. And so I appreciate you especially underscoring about how even these things, very structural things, changes that he's been able to make have been really important and how they've already translated into change. Now, Vanya, you're in the Inland Empire. You're in one of the regions that is seeing more support for the recall. So what are you seeing and hearing from people there? And what do you see as being immediately at risk if a recall is successful?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I want to first thank you, Irene, and Courage California for this platform. And yes, I am in the inland region, and it's been a hotbed in terms of gathering signatures for the recall. And while we see when issues come to the ballot that we care about, the voters usually do the right thing, even when elected leadership doesn't. And so we recognize that there are a lot of dollars coming into this region to make it more likely that there's more support for a recall than not. I think there's ground games that people are doing, and now people are beginning to become concerned about this. So now we're starting to see the pendulum swing, but they've been organizing in Riverside County. And when I say they, I'm referring to Democrats, folks through Ken Calvert's region who have been organizing for the past year, at least for this recall. And so, so I think it's real. We have a stronghold of Republicans in this county, in this region, who don't want to let go. And if they can unseat Gavin Newsom, they can actually change a lot of things for not just the 58 counties, but even in the federal landscape. And I think that's why there's so much at risk in this particular recall. We need to push back as people. And I am a member of IE United, and I sit on the board of IE United. IE United is one of the organizations to make sure, as the young people say, clap back or create a ground game that's going to change the outcome. So I heard the young people say in the survey, in the poll, that they were kind of lukewarm, not really passionate about Newsom. And most days I feel that same way. But in looking at the potential, the possibility of what could happen to the state of California if he's unseated, that kind of galvanizes me a little bit. And there are some concrete steps that he has taken. Of course, for us, not enough, especially when it comes to the area of criminal justice. What I do appreciate are some of the appointments that he made. So he appointed Bonta, who was the first Filipino American to sit as the AG for the state of California. And Bonta has a kind of courage and tenacity to call public safety leaders out when public safety leaders break the law. And I thought that was huge. I also thought it was creative to take juvenile justice out of the realm of public safety and put it smack dab into public health and treat it as a health issue. I also liked actually appointing Nadine Burks, who was the founder of the ACEs, to kind of show that we realize a lot of the problems in our society that we've been criminalizing aren't actually criminal at all, that they should be in the world of public health. And so I appreciate those things, and I'm warming up, to doing what we need to do in this recall. You hear me, Matt? Thank you.
Thank you, Vanya. And I think to put an extra stress on your point, I've had the misfortune of, reading and listening to a lot of the talking points of the Republican candidates who are very vocal, very out there. They have a lot more visibility and a lot more momentum behind them. And several of them, whenever, talking about homelessness, other issues, their solution they always offer always seems to be carceral or, turning to law enforcement. And so it's a very stark picture, I think, as you're saying. So you're based in the Orange County, a lot of folks are really focused on Orange County in 2018, it's famous for sort of being the home of Ronald Reagan and a lot of sort of the right wing aspect as well. So very similar to the Inland Empire in that way. So I'd also love to hear from you, what are you hearing, especially working with the Latino youth in the Orange County, and what do you see as being immediately at risk with this recall?
I think similarly to what was shared before, I think, for us, there is a big interest in criminal justice and in policing and police accountability, especially among young Latinxes. And so, beyond just talking about some of the significant laws that have been passed, police transparency and police misconduct through SB 1492, updated use of force standards through AB 392. There's been significant policy that's been delivered or through the legislative process that Governor Newsom has signed. And I think we also can't separate what a recall of the governor would do to really chill the environment around the progress that we've been making, whether it's been through legislation, through appointments that of the new attorney general, but also through I think I think like it's a testament, just through of like the conditions that having a more like friendly, right, like governor at the top, like with and like that platform, right, like that can be supportive of like reform efforts. I think like it also translates to like the environment that's created for like the ballot measure strategy, right? Because ultimately the governor has a big platform and a big like megaphone. And I can't like imagine, like having, like for, like trying to deliver on like criminal justice reform policies, like through like the ballot and having to fight like the governor, exercising that, like that megaphone to, like to speak out against, people-led like reforms like through the ballot. I think like that's also like really important and something that we can't like lose sight of, like just how important like that actually is. And so like speaking like within like Orange County, right? Like we saw, I think like looking at like the polls and looking at like the demographics, something like important is like there's sections of Orange County that are like right on like that target population that we're talking about. So if we look at like cities like Santana, like Anaheim, like they're very young cities. Like they're very young cities where like the median age is like late 20s, early 30s. And so like if, I think people tend to associate Orange County with like the outside, like the beach cities, maybe like the northern cities, the canyons. But if we look at central Orange County, that's where a lot of the votes to like stop this recall like really are. And so like we need to invest like in outreach for, like for young people, for first, second generation, like immigrants, and Latinos here like in Orange County, because that's, I think like certain cities are very loud, but if we have like the ground game, particularly like in central Orange County, and invest in these communities, we can, we can definitely like defeat this recall in Orange County.
Thank you, Jairo. And I want to lift up something that you said, which is, the alternative is if Governor Newsom gets recalled, we're likely going to end up with a Republican governor. And then you have somebody who's like actively fighting against or suppressing the work you're doing. And yes, as several folks have mentioned, like Governor Gavin Newsom, most of us want him to go further, but he has left the door open. And I also want to mention that he has actively been in conversation with several groups on the ground across issues, across different regions, because he really wants to work more with our communities. So again, like that open door, that welcoming of our allies, people who have these shared progressive values. And of course, that would be a totally different sort of game if we had a different governor. So Amy, you are so clear, and not just about this recall, but in general, you're so clear in speaking to and about the priorities and concerns of women, and especially women of color, both with Women Against the Recall and She the People. So what long-term repercussions could a recall have for women here in California?
Thank you for the question. And I want to just say to Jairo and to Matt and to Vanya that I'm so glad that you are engaged in the places that are going to make the biggest difference. Because the truth of the matter is, if we don't focus on the future of California, both regionally and young people of color, who are the majority of people in the state, then our politics, our democracy here will suffer, and ultimately our issues. I'm the founder and president of She the People, which is a national network elevating the political power of women of color as the core of the Democratic Party. And the reason I'm deeply involved with a statewide coalition of women leaders, some 70 organizations, is because when we think about the groups who are going to be the margin are women of color, including young women of color, who are the majority of women and the strongest Democrats. So I don't believe that this election, the next few weeks, is about persuasion, for or against the recall. It's about education, and it's turning out the vote. And I agree with my other panelists. You know, for me, so much is at stake. I mean, Women Against the Recall started with the leadership of Congresswoman Barbara Lee and Karen Bass around a conversation about making sure that when Kamala Harris went to the White House, that there was representation of women of color, a Black woman in the Senate. And we want to make sure that we focused on that, but we pivoted as a group because we recognized that women and women of color are going to play a key role, and we needed to defend the governor and make sure that the recall is not successful. He's not replaced even for a year by one of the yahoos on that long list on the ballot that I just received. We want to make sure that that Governor Newsom, as has been said before, is in the position to appoint, if there's an opportunity, a senator, as well as the judicial and other positions. So it was first and foremost about promoting representation, and we want him to be in a position to continue to do that. But there are other issues that are highly motivating for women of color. Many have been talked about. The really profound commitment to housing, to renters assistance, and to other things. Those are fundamental issues that really speak to women of color and are the reasons why we need to have that continuity that continues. I mean, we still are facing, because of the Delta variant, we need consistency in terms of dealing with the public health crisis that we're in, as well as the economic crisis that many of our communities are in. So I think for all of those reasons, getting out the vote for women of color is about making that argument. And I don't care if they're a declined estate or a Democrat, we need to let people know that it's at stake. The other thing is, many people aren't aware, is that of the long list of people that are trying to replace Newsom, someone could get a very low, like 5% of the vote or 15% of the vote. And, we could wake up on the 15th of September with a Trump ally as governor of the great state of California. We just simply cannot allow that to happen, because this part of their national strategy to create chaos and threats to our health and safety and economy and democracy. These are the messages that women of color, particularly young women of color, need to hear, that we are recognized as important drivers. And I think what we're doing with Women Against the Recall is convening and coordinating with the 70 member groups who have GOTV efforts, and to get our people out. We're not doing persuasion, we're doing education and getting people, when they get that envelope, to vote no and then turn that thing back in. We know it's going to be a low voter turnout election, but I think the observation about the focus on really engaging women of color, particularly young women of color, is going to be key in this next few weeks.
Thank you, Amy. I'm seeing a lot of questions in the chat. Yes, there are a lot of groups who are doing the ground game in these different regions. Several of them are here on this panel, so I encourage you to look into these organizations. Lisa, thank you for chatting in Alliance San Diego Mobilization Fund. If folks are interested, please do share other alternatives as well. There are a lot of groups, and I would say especially groups of color, who are really focused on turning out young voters, voters of color, and especially that nexus, young voters of color in this election. They need volunteers, but also they need resources as well. And these are voters that they've been engaging on an ongoing basis, year round, year to year. So these are trusted messengers in the community, and folks that I would want to have talking about the recall, because again, this is a very hot button issue. People feel all kinds of ways about Governor Gavin Newsom, but they really care and listen to these trusted messengers. So again, Vanya, Amy, Matt, Jairo, these are all people who, when they speak to their communities, these are the folks that are highly respected. And so that's why we wanted you guys to be able to have a chance to hear from them tonight. But we also want to encourage folks of, like, if you need, talking points, these sorts of things, several of these organizations have put together press releases, communications toolkits. They have some resources on their website, and so does Courage California as well. So there's a lot of tools, there's a lot of language out there. And so I suggest you look out there, because there is some materials out there. It's unfortunately not gaining as much attention necessarily as the Newsom campaign or the Republican candidates. But we can be the ones to change that. So I want to close this panel out with a final question to all of you. So again, you're seeing a lot of these questions happening in the chat. So if you could speak just really quickly about what is your organization doing against the recall, and what is your call to action to Californians? And Matt, I'll start with you.
Yes, so we're doing some expenditure campaigns in some in some districts that we feel like will be critical, that are going to just kind of remind people to get out the vote. Again, this is a get out the vote effort, not a persuasion effort. We're also going to be doing some texting and field get out the vote efforts, especially in the IE and the Central Valley, and then specifically target to BIPOC young voters in those places who aren't as frequent voters. And then the other thing I was going to say, the call to action is what I see a lot of people in the chat saying is like, well, give us marching orders, give us something to do to help get out the vote. That's what it is. Like, the point of us sharing this information is like to equip you with knowledge that you can tell people who are like, we're not sure what the consequences are. Well, this is the consequences, right? And sign up with one of our organizations, reach out to us, reach out to an organization in your county, your neighborhood, to do that work, and they will give you what you need to go knock on doors and or call, text people. And that's what I think we need to do. And to this point, I hope it's not a low turnout election. I'm actually seeing a lot of enthusiasm grow over the last 2 weeks, especially seeing people who haven't been as engaged politically starting to like really care about this. I'm like, oh wow, I have a hope that it will be much better turnout than what we anticipated 2 weeks ago.
Thank you, Matt. And I forgot to mention too, at the end of this call, we're going to have a set of partners who are doing the groundwork out there, and they are ones who are taking on volunteers as we speak. So some of them are active, some of them are ramping up to get started this weekend. So you'll have an opportunity to do that, and we'll also share their contact information on the screen. Next, I do want to turn it over to Vanya. Same to you, like what is Inland Empire United doing around the recall, and then what is your call to action to Californians?
Yeah, and I think it's the same thing. I think we're aware that this is when it's normally a low turnout. This voting is not a high profile voting unless you're watching this governor recall. And so we think it's galvanized a lot of people to come out to vote in favor of the recall, and we have to work as hard or harder to get people to come out and vote against it. So having said that, what we're doing, so IE United, the board is made up of representatives that are there representing themselves, but many of us have ties to other organizations. And so the organization that I'm part of, we're able to do GOTV work. We're able to do educational work. And we have teams of folks who are doing that work. And if anyone's interested, I'm dropping in the chat our email if you want to reach out and be a part of this work. And then I would encourage you or put out this challenge, whether you're part of an organization or a campaign, all of us know people, we're connected to people. Challenge yourself to reach out and get as many people as you can to make sure they get out to actually vote. That's what it comes down to. We can talk a good game, but what are we going to do and how many people are we going to get to do it? So that's the challenge.
Great, thank you, Vanya. And Jairo?
So for our part, like we're really looking to like work with like our partners here, like in Orange County, to do like get out the vote. I think like right now, like we're gonna be focusing like mostly on phone banking, and then like as far as like us, like as an organization, like working with young people, we really want our members to be like the messenger. So we're, so like we're planning like a series of like op-eds like that we're gonna be publishing like here in Orange County, being written like by our members around like some of like the issues that we've been discussing, and really like letting our members, letting like the young people be like their own like best messengers.
Thank you, Jairo. And Amy?
I'd in addition to those things, I dropped 2 of our mini links, and join Women's March or the California Democratic Party's phone banks. You can sign up. President Biden just came out in support of the governor. We can tap a national network as well. So for your friends who might live outside of California, they can help with phone banking and things like that to help us reach our folks. Finally, the most concrete thing you can do is get your closest 10, 25 people to actually turn in that ballot and just tell them to vote no on the first question. Don't vote on the second, and put that thing in the mail. And we need to get votes as early as possible because I agree with the governor. I think it's going to be over by the 14th. It'll be decided. And so the sooner that we can do that, the better. And I think the LA region received their ballots, and Bay Area and other places are starting to receive ballots. So now is the time to do that outreach. So phone banking and text banking are the most powerful. So just pick one and sign up.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Vanya. Thank you, Jairo. Thank you for speaking on this panel. But of course, the bigger thank you is thank you for all the hard work you're doing. I love working with you, and I'm really happy to be working alongside of you to defeat this recall. And then very shortly after that, we are rolling right into 2022. But for now, we'll focus on the task at hand, which is to keep Governor Newsom in office and defeat this recall. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. So now I would like to introduce our next speaker, San Diego Supervisor Nora Vargas. So Supervisor Vargas was elected last year as the first Latina, first immigrant, and first woman of color in the history of the San Diego County Board of Supervisors. She was elected as the vice chair and serves as the co-chair of the county's COVID-19 subcommittee. Prior to becoming supervisor, she was an elected member and president of the Southwestern College Governing Board, vice president of community and government relations at Planned Parenthood of the Pacific Southwest, and has 25 years of experience in community work. And no surprise, she serves on the board of several organizations. Supervisor Vargas, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me. I want to make sure that technology is working here. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here with all of you, and thank you for all of the panelists right now and for the information. I think the information from Data for Social Good, I think, is so critical for us to be able to use this data to make sure that we are getting out there and talking to our communities. And I just think it's so important that we are polling our young people, because often folks say that, you know, people don't want to get engaged or they don't know what's happening. And the truth is our young communities are much more engaged than people actually give them credit for. And they are the ones making the changes in our communities as we speak. And so to me, I am just grateful. You know, I'm an organizer at heart, and that's the world that I come from. And when I think about this recall, I'm really, really frustrated and upset because, you know, I just won an election in November 2020. A lot of folks said it couldn't be done. And yes, I'm really proud to be the first Latina, the first woman of color, a progressive, fronteriza, the only binational person on the Board of Supervisors que habla español. And I won this race in the middle of a pandemic, and we did it because we organized our communities and we knocked on doors and we did everything we needed to do because we knew how this pandemic was impacting particularly the Latino community in San Diego, California, across the state, but particularly in San Diego, California. And I have to tell you that I'm really upset that the Republicans are making us spend all this money on a recall when we should be investing the money on figuring out how we make sure we focus on economic prosperity for our communities. We still aren't out of our COVID pandemic, and I'm concerned about our communities right now. People are hungry. People are being evicted from their houses. You know, people are not healthy. We're trying to figure out how to get people vaccinated, and these Republicans want us to, you know, focus on something that's different. But you know what? I'm committed 100% to voting no on this recall and making sure that our governor continues to stay. Because let me tell you, you know, I ran as a community organizer for healthcare advocacy with a platform to make sure that people had access to healthcare, housing, right to shelter, climate, environmental justice, and really a positive community, you know, safety and women's equity and justice. And I have to say that, you know, January 4th, I got sworn in. And within the first couple of weeks, I had already been working with the governor's office to put pressure on them to make sure that we had more vaccines in San Diego. The governor came. He made sure that we, I took him to Barrio Logan, where Chicano Park is. He had never been there before. Took him to the small businesses so that he can see where the monies were going, so that our small businesses could stay afloat. He made sure that we got extra vaccines for our African American community, and making sure that we were in the churches. He made sure that we got extra vaccines so that our Catholic churches and our churches in the Latino community, where people were, felt okay and they trusted, these locations, they were able to go that. And all of these things happened because the governor and his team listened. I advocated for promotora programs and to make sure that we had money, and they paid attention. And, I want to do my part because he's been doing his part, and we need to defeat this recall because we want to stay on track. We've only just begun for the great things that need to happen in this state. I've been on the front lines in San Diego on issues of air pollution. I'm the chair of the Air Pollution Control District in San Diego. We have some huge issues around the Tijuana River Valley and contamination in our communities. We know that our healthcare system has failed us, and so really putting pressure on really working in partnership with the governor to make sure that things change is really what's going to make a difference. And so, when I ran on the fact that our students at the Southwestern College, I was a community college trustee, and I worked for Planned Parenthood as an executive for about 20 years, and I knew our communities were hungry, and we needed to make a difference. And I really, really have to say that the governor has been a true partner. Governor Newsom has been a partner to our communities, and he's not perfect, but let me tell you, these Republicans who are on that ballot, they are, we're starting to clean up the mess that Trump did in the last, 4 years, and we are barely trying to figure out how to get this done. I mean, I could tell you we had, over 2,600 young girls, at our convention center who had been in deplorable conditions, in our facilities, deportation facilities. And so, there's just so much work to be done. And so for me, I think that what we need to do is we cannot afford a Republican governor. This governor, we can continue to hold him accountable, work with him. He listens and he understands the power of our communities. And so I want to make sure that we get him reelected. And so, as somebody who's dedicated my life to serving our communities, I know hard work is what is going to take to make sure that we continue to move forward. I want to make sure that we continue to work with him. His team members, right? A lot of the team members are folks who have been from the community. People who are heading up his administration are folks who come from community, who are actually understand the power of the work that needs to be done. And so, he's led us to some really hard times, and being an elected official right now is not easy. And you know what? That's my job. My job is to make hard decisions, and not everybody's going to like you, and we get that. But what we need to do is what's right, not only short-term and long-term. And he's been doing that, and he does it based on science. He does it based on data, and he does it based on what is best for our communities as a whole. And he's taken some really, bold steps to ensure that people have access to funding, right? Whether it's through our unemployment opportunities, the small business grants, just really, really doing the right thing. And so I want to make sure that we can continue the fight. And I do want to say that para mí es muy importante que como nos comuniquemos con nuestras comunidades que hablan español también, porque las comunidades latinas han estado sumamente impactadas por el COVID. Ya teníamos muchas situaciones muy difíciles mucho antes de que empezara COVID, y ahora estamos aquí y tenemos la oportunidad de votar en contra del recall, para que se pueda quedar el gobernador y podamos seguir trabajando con él, porque él ha hecho mucho trabajo que ha sido impactante para nuestras comunidades. Entonces, tonight, I really want to urge all of you. I mean, I think all of you know how to do this. All of you are here because you care, but we can't go backwards. We have to make sure we put our communities, at the forefront. There's a lot of risk in ensuring if we don't have him get reelected. So if we make sure that the recall doesn't pass. And so please vote no on the recall. Yes to progress, yes to equality, and yes to all of us in California, so that we can make sure that we thrive, and that progressive policies that I am fighting for, I'm going to be able to partner up with Governor Newsom so our communities have a better opportunity to move forward. And if I learned anything from the pandemic and running a campaign, a really, really tough campaign, you all can go back and look at how hard it was this race. And when people said that I couldn't do it, I'll tell you, we did it based on community and knocking on doors through the pandemic, getting on the phone, telling our tios, our tias, our abuelitas to get out there and vote and why this mattered. And I think, you know, to the point of the previous panelists, we are the influencers. We are the people who make a difference. You don't have to be an elected official to be able to move our communities. All of you, you know, organizers who have the corazón and the heart to make a difference in our communities, this is the time for us to put pressure, out there and to make sure that our communities get out and vote. So I am so happy to be here, and let's go win this and fight these, you know, Trumpists, and let's show them that in California, this nonsense is not going to be acceptable.
Thank you, Supervisor Vargas. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your partnership. I know several of our San Diego partners have spoken really highly about you. We're really excited when you were elected. And of course, we want to make sure you have all the tools and resources to govern well. And of course, that includes Governor Gavin Newsom as a partner, as a governor. So thank you to you. And next, I want to introduce our next speaker, Assemblymember Alex Lee from the 25th Assembly District, which includes parts of Alameda and Santa Clara counties. Courage California, we actually endorsed Assemblymember Lee in 2020, and we're working with him on some important progressive legislation, like getting corporate money out of state political campaigns. And we endorsed Alex Lee because he just has always been a champion on a bold progressive agenda and is very unapologetic about it. So prior to serving as an assembly member, he worked on policy and legislation for both the California State Senate and Assembly. Assemblymember Lee, thank you for speaking with us tonight. Good to see you.
Well, good to see you too. And thank you for having me on to talk about the recall, something that I can tell you is occupying a lot of space and attention in California politics, to the point that it is very, very annoying. So, you know, I think to the point where a lot of our speakers have already made is how important the recall election is right now, and how important it is not to have a Republican, even if it is just for a year, how important it is to not have that. Every single voter in California who's a registered voter right now will get their mail-in ballots starting in the next couple of days or so until September 14th. You will get that. And it is so important to vote in this election, because it is unlike any other election. It is just a simple turnout game. It's not the normal kind of cycles. And I saw something today which was very interesting. And I think this is an interesting narrative. And this is kind of my sadistic hobby of watching the alt-right, what they do. And I'm very interested in seeing what their messaging is like. But the Republicans have constantly said this. The Republican governors have constantly said this thing where they're not running against each other. They're running against Gavin, right? And some of the people in political observers or myself will say, that's kind of weird. Isn't it technically running against each other to be governor? But it's actually true, right? Because the more Republican big things to jump into, they drive more and more turnout. That's their secret sauce. That's how they're trying to win. They want more and more people to vote, especially people who are Republican or Trump fans to vote, right? While they rely on progressive voters or Dem voters to sit out on it. This is unlike any other election in that sense, where it's all about who can generate more voters in this sense, in a very strange time. And, we can hopefully it will be a good turnout. But even with the special elections in the assembly where I serve, the turnout has been pretty low. Even with all mail-in ballots has been actually pretty low, even for districts that historically are pretty engaged. So we cannot understate the fatigue of voters, the attention of voters, and of course, the random time of year it is in September. We cannot underestimate that. And that's why it's so important to tell your friends, tell your family, there's something going on right now. This piece of mail you got, that's a ballot. It's something that's actually happening, and why it's important. Let's also tell you what's at stake here. Even though we have a Democratic supermajority in the Senate and the Assembly in the state legislature, the governor still controls the entire executive branch. So if you have known anyone or you personally have had trouble with unemployment, the EDD department, a Republican administration now controls that. They'll then control all the other departments that control everything that we pass as laws and execute them. And they can basically say, we won't do those things. That's why it's so incredible that they could just reverse what we do on climate, reverse what we do on workers' rights, simply by not even doing it. So they don't technically break any laws. They can just not do something even for a year, and that could set us back a lot. As we learned from the Trump administration time, simply not doing anything, especially during a crisis, has a lot of harm. And that is really what's at stake here. And they could radically change the course of a lot of things. And if there are any bills that you've been advocating for as well, things from criminal justice reform space to workers' rights or to the climate, and that we really worked really hard to pass, it could pass, and then it could get vetoed by a Republican governor and might not get revived by our legislature, unfortunately. So those are all things that are at stake. And really having California's blue led by a Republican and dismantled for a while has irreparable harm, because other states, I can tell you from interacting with my colleagues from other states, they watch what we do, and it sets such a precedent where then maybe they will inspire the Republicans and the alt-right of the other states to do similar things to take over, right? We have seen in the news over and over again, there are right-wing militia, white supremacist groups that have plotted to kidnap their governors and do other things. But now this is to take the governorship by legal means. And obviously, I think our recall process needs some reform. It was created 100 years ago, granted, but like again, to explain to people, this is unlike any election because it's a predicated 2-question series. You never have anything like this before. You don't say, if you vote for this person president, who do you want for, I don't know, like Secretary of State or something, right? This is really the 2-parter question that is tripping people up a lot. So when you vote, when you vote no on the recall, it is your personal choice whether or not you want to vote for anyone on the second question. The official governor's campaign, they advise you not to put anyone, but that's putting all our eggs in the no column. So that's really your personal choice. But really, as long as you vote in the no column and we win that one, that's all right. I mean, once we pass 50% on the yes side, it's all kind of like, Wild West ultimately, which can also be a nightmare when you think about it. Is technically anyone, Republican or a Democrat or any other governor candidate running, could win with, say, 200 votes. It's just whoever has the most, just period. There's no runoff. There's no second round. It's just it. And they immediately become governor, essentially immediately become governor. So that's really what's at stake here. And if you have a lot of, if you have problems or you have misgivings about this governor, as I do, this is not the time to air those things. We have 2022. We have the normal process to figure that stuff out. Right now, it's kind of like disaster mode. And really, as we are ramping up our response to the Delta variant and the new pandemic, situation we're in, we don't really want a governor that literally is making anti-masking and anti-vaccine their hallmark, as we see the Republicans do. And think about that again, a Republican with these beliefs who has the power to enact these things, or at least just not do things that need to be done, is very scary to me. And that's why it's so important to vote. So when you get that piece of paper in the mail, tell your friends or family, like, you actually got to fill this out and send it in. It is literally free, and you get it in the mail. You don't got to go anywhere. And it takes like 2 seconds, literally, because it's only one side this time. So do what you can. You can save democracy. Literally, it only takes minutes. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Assemblymember Lee. And while we have you, there was a question that came in the Q&A that was specific to you. Of course, in the original language of the recall petition, the petition supporters were actually calling out specifically Governor Newsom's moratorium on the death penalty. And so one of our participants really wanted to hear from you, like, how do you want to speak specifically to sort of the death penalty and sort of the consequences on this recall as well?
So, I mean, yes. So I think what it's stemming from is that, we recently, 4-6 years ago, as the state of California, very confusingly, also by the ballot, voted on the death penalty, right? And then the voters voted to essentially uphold death penalty, even though then the Governor Newsom, came in very early, and I agree with this, is he basically essentially, right, as the power of governor, stopped having executions. This is on the flip side again, just like a Republican governor can, there is law and there is acting upon the law, right? The governor, the administration, executive branch acts on the law, so he can change it differently. Obviously, the proponents of the recall are probably genuinely also very pro-death penalty and killing more people in the judicial system, so it's not a surprise they bring that up. But that was always an early gripe where, I guess I'm explaining for historical context, but people were central people on the right were always griping about executive overreach, like his ban on his ban on combustion engine vehicle sales, which we did 2 years ago, which a lot of us agree on and want to do, but of course is slightly controversial from a executive power standpoint. But those are all things people throw in, right? Like when someone overreaches or does something they don't like, they'll pin it on something like that. So it just happens all the time.
Thank you, Assemblymember Lee. And then one final question I have for you. I mean, you've really put yourself out there. I think we've even seen with candidates who have been running in different races, they look to you as sort of like the progressive beacon in the state legislature. You mentioned, of course, you are left of the governor very clearly, and we've definitely seen some hesitation or some pushback from folks who I would say want the governor to do more or are upset with him coming more from the left. So how is it that you're speaking to people specifically who want to see the governor do more, are really unhappy because they feel like he's not doing a good job from the left, more progressive flank of the Democratic Party?
Yeah, I mean, I always say is, whatever problem you have with Gavin Newsom, this unfortunately, this recall is a binary choice of, do you want Gavin or something objectively worse than Gavin? That's just frankly it. If you are upset about him not doing enough in justice reform, or about taxing the wealthy, which he has opposed me on, I can guarantee you Larry Elder or all these other people are also going to fight me even harder on these things, and they're going to do as much damage, if not more. So that's just the reality right here. It's an imperfect part of this quirk of our democratic process where it is a binary choice. It is status quo or worse. It is not, in this case, status quo or better, ? It is status quo or worse. That is what you're picking at. It is an unfortunate binary decision you're at, and that's what I tell people. And it's really up to you, right? Do you really want something that is worse than now? And that's it. That is the question. That's really technically what the question is at this point.
Yes, thank you so much, Assemblymember Lee. Thank you for joining us tonight. And also, of course, thank you for your leadership in Sacramento and around the state. We will be in touch, of course, as we continue to move things in the state legislature, because legislature has some work there to do as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
So now I want to move us to the Q&A section and answer some of the questions. I know we've been seeing some in the Q&A section, but I also encourage you to also put some in the chat as well. So definitely the one I keep seeing very consistently is, I know folks have a lot of questions on what to do about question number 2 on the ballot. So I just want to reemphasize, on the ballot, there's just going to be 2 questions that folks have to answer. The first is whether or not you would vote to recall the governor and remove him from office. And then the second question is going to ask, who would you want to replace the governor? So to be clear, regardless of how you vote on the first question, you can answer the second question. And then another point of clarity is that when they count the ballots, they're going to count the ballots on the first question first. So if more than 50% of voters vote to recall the governor, then it goes into counting the votes on the second question to determine who has the most votes. So as has been mentioned before, whoever has the most votes just becomes the next governor. So they can have a much smaller percentage than obviously Governor Newsom won to win the seat in 2018. So that is the danger of this, and that's why I think several folks have been pointing out in the chat. And as was highlighted in a New York Times editorial or op-ed, that there's really questionable things about this process. It seems very undemocratic because we could be electing our next governor with with single-digit support. So, as you know, in the original recall in 2003, the Lieutenant Governor Cruz Bustamante ran, and there are debates as to whether or not him running actually drew and attracted more people to actually recalling Governor Gray Davis. And of course, as we know, Cruz Bustamante did not win enough votes to win the governorship, and it ended up going to Governor Schwarzenegger. So in this year, the Democrats were really, they kept things really tight. So they ended up essentially keeping any particularly viable qualified Democrat from running on this for the second question on the ballot. So when it comes to answering the second question, I think as Amy has mentioned, most groups, the Newsom campaign and the Democratic Party are advocating that people just vote no and not vote on the second question. However, and that is something that Courage is advocating for as well. However, I know that people don't like feeling like they don't have a vote that counts on the second question. So in terms of the second question, I want to say, as Alice had mentioned, you either have Republicans who have held elected office before, and we know where they stand on things in opposition to a lot of what we believe in, or you have a lot of candidates who have never held elected office before, haven't been involved in politics, haven't even been involved in their communities very much. So it's very dangerous because the slate of candidates, there is no one who stands out, who will be viable, who will be more progressive, or who will deliver on what we want from Governor Gavin Newsom. Right now, Larry Elder, of course, the conservative talk show host, he is polling really well, and there is more momentum building behind him. So the likelihood of somebody else on the ballot, either a Democrat or a Green Party candidate or somebody else of your choice, being able to overcome a Larry Elder or any of the other top Republican candidates is very unlikely. So with that said, though, I encourage folks, if you really want to vote on the second question, do your due diligence, do your research to find out who these candidates are, and make your selection based on who you think you would trust to govern this state. And that's what I will say about that. I do want to mention that a lot of these candidates don't even have a campaign website or much on the internet. So you might not be able to find out a whole lot of information about them. So do your research and find out what makes sense for you on that second question. Let's see. Sorry, and then related, I saw some folks had some questions on, in terms of the second question. So there are 46 candidates who are running on the ballot. So there are no possibilities for writing in candidates. You can only vote for the certified list of 46 candidates. So any write-in candidates will be thrown out. So I saw some folks that sort of mentioning this idea of potentially writing in Lieutenant Governor Kounalakis, and you could, it just won't count for anything, unfortunately. Then, sorry, let's see. Then I think in terms of what Alex Lee said, I see another question is like, what would you say to friends who say the governor has not met the moment or delivered what we need? I would say that there are definitely, as Supervisor Vargas said, we do want to keep pushing Governor Newsom and we want to keep holding him accountable, but that door is still open with him and he is actively working with our groups to keep pushing. So even if you're unhappy with him, at least he is working with the trusted groups and the trusted messengers here on this call. With the Republican candidates, we know that they're going to be talking to a very different set of organizations, and they're going to be pandering to their base as well. And so it's going to be a very different kind of agenda. And instead of having somebody we can continue to push to go forward, we're going to have people like Larry Elder is saying that there are some things that he wants to roll back immediately. He's the one who's out there promoting that he thinks the minimum wage should be $0. So again, very, very stark difference. As Assemblymember Lee mentioned, this is going to be a situation of you have Governor Gavin Newsom or worse. And that is the black and white and very stark choice. I just want to be mindful, there are a few more questions. Please continue to write some in the chat and in the Q&A. Some of my colleagues are actually answering the questions there. I do want to leave some time because it seems like, of course, there's been a lot of enthusiasm from all of you to hear from partners and understand what's happening on the ground and the ways that you can be connected. Thank you to those of you who have been dropping some of the resources and links in the chat so folks can figure out where to sign up. So now I want to really turn it over to some of our partners, and to put things in context, we're going to hear from several of our partners who are doing work around different issues in different ways, and we're also going to be hearing from the Newsom campaign as well. And I want to emphasize too, the reason why we're having all these folks on is, of course, we need to cover as many voters around the state as possible. But as was mentioned before, right, different messaging is going to hit with different voters. We just need as many voters as possible to turn out to vote and vote no on the recall. So the more times people hear the messages, the better. And the more we can put out messages that speak to different people about the things they care about, the better. And so that's why we wanted to invite this group of folks on. So I just want to mention really quickly, so on the C3 side, so again, nonpartisan, this is just about getting out the vote. We're going to hear from Juan Rubalcaba at ACE and Oyema Obekia from Black Women for Wellness Action Project. Then on the C4 side, which is of course where you can do more work and talk about actual no on the recall, we're going to hear from Gina Moore from NARAL Pro-Choice California and Lindsay Hopkins and Eric Alfaro from the Newsom Stop the Republican Recall campaign. So first, Juan, I want to turn it over to you. If you want to do a quick summary of the kind of work that you're doing and how folks can volunteer and turn out to help you guys turn out more voters around the state.
Yeah, thanks, Irene. Like Irene said, I'm with ACE, which is on the slide right there in front of y'all. That's the Alliance of Californians for Civic. Alliance of Californians for Community Empowerment is actually what it's supposed to be. Although civic empowerment is definitely what we're talking about today. We are going to be doing phone banking, which you can do remotely, even though we have locations in these areas here that's listed on the slide. Definitely hit me up if you're interested in doing that kind of phone banking. If you are near one of our offices, you can also do some door knocking. I feel like what's missing here is also we're going to be doing outreach in the city of Antioch in Contra Costa. So, hoping to get out the vote in communities that are working class, immigrant, Black and brown, target folks who don't usually go out and vote as often, just really doing that turnout.
Thank you, Juan. Oyema?
Thank you, Irene. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Irene, for the space and for inviting us to share the work that we're doing. My name is Oyema Obekia, as was previously mentioned, and I'm with Black Women for Wellness and Black Women for Wellness Action Project. And we have a 501c3 and a 501c4 wing, and our focus, we are committed to the well-being and building the power of Black women and girls throughout the state of California. And so that is our population, that is our focus and our target. So on the C3 side, BWW will engage in GOTV efforts through phone banking, canvassing, texting, and house parties. So we welcome volunteers to join our canvassing, phone banking, and house party efforts. So of course, my information is right here. So contact me. And we're also running ad campaigns that are C3 compliant, of course. And you'll see them in bus shelters throughout Los Angeles and wild postings throughout LA and the San Francisco Bay Area. But as far as our what we need help with, or what we'd like volunteers for canvassing, we'd love volunteers to join us as we canvass the 2nd Supervisorial District, which is particularly focusing in South Los Angeles. And then as for phone banking and texting, we welcome volunteers for that as well. And our focus areas or regional focuses are Los Angeles, Palmdale, Lancaster, Stockton, Fresno, and Oakland and the Bay Area. So please, if you are interested in joining us and volunteering with our organization, we welcome you. Just send me an email and we will move forward from there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Oyema. And then apologies, Tina, I forgot to mention you in the quick introduction. Next, I want to turn it over to Tina McKinner, who's Deputy Director at LA Voice Action, to talk about their outreach efforts. Tina?
Yes, good afternoon. Excuse me for my voice, you guys. I have a little bit of laryngitis. LA Voice Action is a faith-based organization that supports leaders that govern with a moral compass. We will call over 100,000 voters that we have contacted for over a year and a half. We've talked to these voters about everything: the census, DA education, COVID testing, COVID vaccination sites, the recall election, and stop the recall on George Gascon, because we have our problem here in LA County with the recall on George. So what LA Voice Action has decided to do is to start our paid phone callers on Sunday. We'll start that. We'll do it 5 days a week, 5 hours a day. We'll call these 100,000 voters back. And then we're asking volunteers to join our virtual volunteer phone banking on August 4th and 5th and August 11th and 12th from 2 to 6. You can contact myself, Tina, at LA Voice Action. to help, lavoiceaction.org to help us out. We believe that actually, sitting down, talking to the voters, especially after they've been educated by us about the recall for the past 3 months, to now just come in on the C4 side and ask them to vote no on the recall is right on time. We feel like we can move these 100,000 voters to the polls and to vote no, and especially with your help on our volunteer days. Thank you.
Thank you, Tina. And next we'll hear from Gina from NARAL Pro-Choice California. Gina?
Hi, everyone. My name is Gina Moore. I am the California Organizing Manager for NARAL Pro-Choice California. We are an advocacy and political reproductive rights organization. We know that many Californians, 90% of women in California, cite reproductive freedom as one of their most important issues when they go to the ballot box, which is why every single Tuesday from now into the recall at 6 p.m., we're going to be hosting our virtual power hours. That will be an hour of phone banking, text banking, or relational organizing. It may be a combination of many things. Please go to, I can put it in the chat, naral.us/CA power is where we will be every Tuesday until the recall. You can also go to our link tree, which there may be some more events to come with some other reproductive rights organizations, and we will post those there. But for the most part, every single Tuesday, we will be there making calls, sending texts, reaching out to our friends. Governor Newsom has really made good on his promise to reproductive freedom and to advance and expand abortion access in the state. So please come volunteer with us, come volunteer with our partners here. It is so important for the future of reproductive freedom here in California. Thank you.
Thank you, Gina. And finally, I want to welcome Lindsay Hopkins and Eric Alfaro. They're from the Stop the Republican Recall campaign. Of course, that is Newsom's own campaign. Lindsay and Eric, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having us today. Eric and I are here with the Stop the Republican Recall. We do have a number of volunteer opportunities that are available. I do want to lift up the folks who came before us. These are all fantastic options and have always been wonderful partners. When I'm not with the Stop the Republican Recall, I work for Organized Labor, I work for SEIU. Eric, my colleague, also works for CTA. We know how important so many of these issues are, but really what's at stake here is making sure that we stop this recall and that folks vote no. In the field, we're getting a lot of feedback from folks that they're strongly against the recall, but they frankly don't know there's an election. And if they do know that there's a recall, they think it's in November. So taking the time to work with folks to get them knowledgeable about the election, whether it's through C3 or C4 work, is vitally important. So my pitch today is to talk about our door knocking, phone banking, and text banking operations. Eric is dropping the links in the chat if you want to go directly there and sign up for some shifts. We have partnered with the California Democratic Party to put up a dialing system. So we're going to be dialing 6 days a week between now, every single day except for Fridays between now and the election. We'd love for you to come out and help us. Phoning is really going to be the best way for us to have a real substantive conversations with folks during this time of COVID. We will also be doing safe door knocking practices across the state in combination with labor and with the California Democratic Party and with a number of other organizations who are interested in participating. Our biggest pushes are going to be phone banking. Eric dropped in the Mobilize link. Eric? Yeah?
Yeah, it's in.
Okay, awesome. And then we're going to be doing a really big push on the weekends leading up to the election, and especially the last 4 days, to go do ballot pickups from folks. Since this is a very short ballot, we're hoping that we can have folks vote with us either on the phone or at the door, and then just hand us the ballots to make sure that we're getting all those votes in as quickly as possible. I'll pause there to see, Eric, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
I think the only other thing is just, something I like to make clear and point out is that, the threat is not from the Republican side. We're not dealing with the typical Republicans. We're dealing with Trump Republicans. So much is at stake. You know, if there's ever been a moment for you to kind of jump in and get involved, you know, volunteer, that moment is now. You know, to win, we're not going to need a dozen volunteers. We're not going to need hundreds of volunteers. We're going to need thousands of volunteers. So we encourage you, sign up for a shift, volunteer, make some calls. We're going to need every single one of you to win.
Could not have said that better myself.
Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you, Eric, Gina, Tina, Onyema, and Juan. Thank you for all the work you're doing, and I'm glad that you could join us this evening. As they all just mentioned, we just need to reach as many voters as possible this election. So I encourage you all to sign up to volunteer with an organization or a campaign whose work and messaging really resonates with you. This election is going to come down to turnout, which again, like, it's going to depend on energy and engagement. And as you heard, also ballots are going out now. So Juan even texted me the other day that he got the text that his ballot was coming out, and so people are actually making their choices now. So this is the time to really encourage people to vote no on the recall and say yes to progress. And then, you know, as Lisa was saying before, and Supervisor Vargas, then it's about getting your family and your friends to turn in their no ballots and then sign up to turn out more voters. Because this is really more than just about the recall. This is a battle for the soul of our state. So we don't need to just defeat this recall for the electoral win. We need to win the hearts and minds of all Californians in pursuit of a more equitable and just California. With courage, we can defeat this recall and fight for a California that works for all of us. Thank you all for joining us. Turn in your ballots, get your other folks to turn in your no ballots, and turn out and volunteer with these partners in these campaigns. We need every single no vote in. Thank you and good night.